Feeling better, stick around, we're gonna set up the chairs, and have a good evening.
Did you enjoy the movie? Do you love the funk? We got a good crowd here.
First I want to say sorry about the subtitles. I hope everybody realized that you just couldn't read them. They're normal at the end. Sorry about that. I'm trying to figure out exactly what happened. But thank you all so much for coming.
I guess, could you two introduce yourselves?
I'm Stanley Nelson, producer director.
Now, guys, how did the film come together?
A few years ago, we made a film together. Miles Davis, Birth of the Cool, about Miles Davis. The film premiered at Sundance. We had a big party, and the music was blasting. And some people who were involved in funding the film said, "Oh man, this is great. What do you want to do next?" And funk music was playing, and I couldn't think of anything else to say but funk. So yeah, we wanted to do funk, and that's kind of how it came about.
Do you have any personal relationship to making music and funk music, of course?
Nope.
No, I mean, I took piano lessons for 10 years and I couldn't even play chopsticks right now. But I have had quite a few music films, that I've produced, so that's as close as I've come.
Okay. So, one of the interesting things with the film for me is, I've seen a lot of music documentaries on many of the artists that you feature here, but this film kind of, fills the middle ground, kind of brings all of that together with, a basic understanding of that music. Can you talk a little bit about what your goals were, when making this film?
Yeah, I mean, one of the first goals we wanted to accomplish is for the film to be kind of wall-to-wall music. We kept talking about the fact that you see a lot of music films and you really don't hear the music. So we wanted to figure out a way to just keep the music pumping and keep it loud. And then we wanted to put funk in context, and then I think part of the way through we realized that really it was a film about the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and funk by way of funk music. So we wanted to talk about what was happening in those times, but through the lens of funk.
Our other main goal was not to make it so encyclopedic, it's not a travel log through funk music. We really wanted to get the more interpretation of the feel of the time and the music itself. So I think we really tried to push that forward more than having so much about facts and dates.
Yeah, I think at one point they wanted to call it funk, the history of funk music, and we're like, no, it's not. We don't want. It's not a history. It's more like a fever dream.
Yeah, I thought it really broke down what funk music was, kind of the music theory and some of the science behind it and all of that. Was that an intentional thing you guys were trying to make happen, or
Well, one thing that we said is, if you don't learn anything else from this film, that you'll learn what the one is.
Yeah.
Because people would always talk about the one, and I'm like, what are you talking about? And I think we did that really well. And now you all know what the one is.
Yeah, there's certain ideas that we wanted to drill down on. The idea of the Afrofuturism, and how that is so tied in with funk music, especially more than any other genre. And then the idea of, does music take you higher? I found a neuroscientist that could speak to that. And so those ideas, and then tying funk to gospel. Those are the main things that we really wanted to make sure that audiences, could connect with and, see what the vibe was after that.
All right. I don't know. I think we might open this up. Does anybody have any questions? We're going right over there.
I'm thinking about the news today, about the CPB. But before that, I want to thank you for Firelight and what you do for moving money and resources to Black what we need, Mr. Nelson, is like a whole bunch of firelights. And I would love is there a conversation about, how are the Firelight Media organizations connecting and, thinking about how to fill this void that the loss of the CPB is going to create?
Yeah, I think that, it's too early. We're all just devastated by the news that everybody hasn't heard. CPB announced today that they are shutting down their office at the end of September, I believe it is. That they're shutting down, and it's just, devastating. And, so many films and people and organizations will be affected by that. Firelight. This film was funded in part by CPB. Black Public Media, I believe, is funded, in part by CPB, which, were instrumental in the film Seeds that was, and on and on and on. I mean, everybody's going to be affected. And I think that, I was going to say this to the end, but, we just have to figure out and think about ways to fight back, because what's happening now is not normal, it's insane, and it's going to change, the way that we all work and do business. But we can fight it, we're stronger than that maniac and those maniacs, who exist.
Mission accomplished for the wall-to-wall music. I was moving the whole time and worn out even though I was sitting the whole time. But one of the things I found fascinating is how public policy affects the course of music. So instruments are available and you get Ohio, take all the instruments away and we get hip hop. Was that something you knew about going in, or was that something you kind of learned as you made the documentary?
I think, we kind of knew about it. I don't think we went in thinking that it was going to be part of the documentary. I think that Nicole came up with the question, what's the capital, hip-hop capital? And people kept saying Ohio. And then we said, well, why is it Ohio? I think that's how we got to that. But I think, we didn't know exactly that would be part of the film, or, the whole the hip hop thing. We knew that we wanted hip hop to be part of it, but we didn't know, how we'd get to it.
Yeah, going into it, I thought more about schools being funded, but I didn't really think about what would happen when that funding was taken away. That's really what led to hip hop being rising up in the cities. That the public instruments being taken out of the schools, it really led them to think of new ways to be creative. So we can curse and thank the government for that.
Hi guys, thank you so much for your wonderful film. Also thank you for the shout out to CPB. I work for public media here in Philadelphia, and part of my job is to source archival for our digital videos. Something I am wondering is, when in the process are you deciding which archival videos to use to make the points that your interviewees are making? And who do you reach out to get just beautiful images of Black people, families, and life throughout history?
Yeah, so we had an archival producer, and I think, different from some filmmakers, we try to keep the archival producer on as much as we possibly can, if we can afford it, for the whole project. We're looking for footage constantly from day one. We kind of have a wish list, and we kind of have an idea of what areas we're going to cover, and we're just constantly looking for footage. In some ways, the film drives the footage, but in other ways, the footage drives the film. So we're constantly looking, and we're looking everywhere. It's not like we look in one archive or one place, but anywhere we can find stuff.
Yeah, I started pulling archival about maybe 4 months before the archival producer, who was incredible, Hannah Shepard, joined us. And she really was able to drill down and getting us some of the more things that we use for nuance. But a lot of the the concert footage and stuff I'd already pulled early on. But it was really going through that she took the job on really combing through all the clips, because there was something like 5,000 assets to go through. So it was a huge task, and we had a ton of interns helping as well.
Yeah, I mean, I should say that that's one of the great advantages of working with Nicole, because Nicole has got just about every job in documentary filmmaking. So, you know, she's great at archival, she's a great producer, she's a great associate producer, she's a great director. So, you know, she can start pulling stuff and getting an idea, you know, before the archival producer kind of comes on.
Hey, Nicole, thank you so much for that. It was fun, it was funky, it felt really good. You hit most of my favorites and most of, I think, a lot of people's favorites. Can you just share if there are any storylines or any groups or artists that you thought about including that didn't make the final cut?
You know, I've said this before. I have this kind of brain that like, you know, once the film's finished, I forget all the stuff that I could have done, should have done, would have done, or else I go crazy. You know, I'd just be sitting there, oh God, we should have, you know. But I don't know. I mean, it was more, you know, it was a constant back and forth and battle of what we could use and what we could get the rights to, and that was really the struggle. And sometimes, you know, we were on speed dial with our lawyer, you know, a fair use lawyer, who would say, oh, cut 2 seconds and then you can use it, or cut, you know, do it this way. And so it was more kind of cutting around different things that we couldn't get the rights to. And a lot of times the rights, especially for popular music, are just crazy. They're just messed up, you know. So like hip hop, people don't never know like what the artist actually used. So there might be, you know, 10 underlying songs, but the section that you want to use might only have 2 of those or 3 of those, but nobody actually knows. And so it's just a weird, that was our real battle.
Yeah, I honestly don't recall like what was left on the cutting room floor, because there were so many battles and chipping away. You know, this was a little bit of a longer film, and I think that's part of why the captions went out of sync. But yeah, in those battles, we learned to let things go really pretty easily.
Well, we found a workaround. You know, I mean, one song I won't even mention because I can't even remember is actually like this. We found this karaoke version of the song, and it sounds just like the song, you know. But and we just use it in the background. So, okay.
How did you decide? I was expecting to see James Brown and George Clinton, but I was really surprised to see Elton John, David Bowie, and David Byrne. So I was just wondering, like, what you were thinking about. Did you go into it thinking about that, or did that just kind of evolve?
We really only had gone into it thinking about David Byrne, because Stanley had really was like, you know, he'd been watching Stop Making Sense. Right as we were starting the film, he's like, you know, that's fun. You know, we got to have something about that in here. But David Bowie came to us through one of our editors, Mark Faison, had worked on the Luther Vandross film. And he said, oh, you know, this man Carlos Alomar is fantastic. He's worked with James Brown and he's worked with David Bowie. There's a definite through line from the James Brown to David Bowie. And he's got great stories. And so we reached out to him and he turned out to be just as fantastic as advertised. But Benny and the Jets actually came up completely spontaneous. When I interviewed Kirk Franklin, we were talking about, trying to talk about David Byrne a little bit, and he brought up Benny and the Jets out of nowhere. But before that, Donnie Simpson had brought up Benny and the Jets out of nowhere because he had been a DJ and really kind of brought that record, Benny and the Jets, forward. So when Kirk Franklin mentioned it, I was like, oh, now we have something here with 2 people spontaneously mentioning it. So that's, it's just a fortuitousness of, the interview process.
Yeah, and I think, it being Elton John and David Bowie, 2 of the biggest stars and their influence on funk, and funk's influence on them, but then it was hilarious when George Clinton talks about, David Bowie and we wanted the funk and that connection. And so, yeah, it's just 2 great stories.
Thank you for the jam. It's beautiful. Also curious about your use of academics who are also funky musicians, such as Dr. Jason King and Scott Brown, who was one of your advisors, and D'Angela Duff. Well, I don't think D'Angela plays an instrument, but I thought it was interesting that you had two of the preeminent music scholars who themselves are also musicians. Can you talk about your choice in using them in particular?
Yeah, I mean, I thought that you know, well, Scott Brown, you know, I had actually interviewed him a long time ago for, I think, a film on the Black Panthers, and I was thinking about funk, you know, early on, and talked to him, you know, and he just felt like he would be a great interview. He's writing a book. He's been writing a book for a long time, but he's writing a book about, I think it's Ohio funk, and so you know, we wanted to include him. But I mean, I think that we wanted as many musicians as we could get, and Nicole was really great, I think, at getting a bunch of musicians to bring their instruments, you know, because that's really hard. You know, like a lot of times musicians will say, well, I'll do an interview, but if you want me to play, you gotta pay.
Yeah, that was really wonderful. I really appreciate you guys putting that together for us. I'm from Detroit, and not a lot. And a lot of, you know, Detroit will tell you a lot of great music was invented in Detroit. Motown, as you know, Funkadelic, of course, but also techno. So you may be wondering, why am I talking about techno at a funk music movie? And maybe you know the answer, but I'm going to put it out there and wonder if you know more about this than I do. But techno was actually invented in Detroit by 3 black kids. And I grew up in the 80s in Detroit, and techno was the music of black youth. At least some black youth in Detroit, a large population of it. At least through the 80s and, you know, part of the 90s. And if you ask the inventors of techno, Derek May and Kevin Saunderson and Juan Atkins, you know, what their vision was, they'll tell you it was George Clinton and Kraftwerk stuck in an elevator. So I was wondering if you've encountered any of that, and I thought I would just try to put that out there in Philadelphia too.
Like, just remember, to tie back to her question, yeah, that, like, getting into techno and dance music and even drilling further into disco, it turned out that was gonna be too big. Because once you start with funk, there's so many different branches. And so we try to keep it more contained by not going into those extra avenues. Because, you know, then, you know, we really could have talked about it for 4 to 6 hours. You're already tired, it's like 11 o'clock.
Any other questions? What?
Well, can we give it up for these guys? We're going to start with our exit out. Thank everybody for coming through.